Good evening, everybody across the UAE. Eid Mubarak to everybody that's watching. I hope that you have had not only a fantastic Ramadan, but also looking forward to your celebrations in the next 5 days across the region. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear what you're up to, what your plans are, either with your friends or your family over these Eid celebrations. So please do drop them in the comments. It's always great to hear from people. And of course, if you have any questions or anything that really resonates with you from our guest this evening, it's also lovely to hear and see your comments and bring in any questions that you might have for the content the guest is sharing about this evening. So I hope you have a fantastic celebration. Whilst I'm on the sort of the content or the discussion of comments, please don't forget to subscribe. I think it's a button down there or down there. I should know now because we are exactly 1 year and 1 week into running our weekly show, Learn Live UAE. Before we get started, just a couple of little things to remember. We had Lisa Grace on the show last week. Don't forget that you can sign up to either present or to participate in the Middle East Teaching and Learning Conference. It's an online conference. It was a massive success last year. It's the 24th, 25th of August this year. Just go to the URL that you can see on the screen, meteachingandlearning.com. It's 104 days away. That sounds like a long way away, but before we know it, we've only got 7 weeks of term left, 35 working days, and then it'll be the summer holidays. Whether you're traveling or not, I think this would be a great thing to get involved in. A bit of free CPD, thinking ahead to the next academic year. What have I been up to? Last week I did a webinar for BSME, sharing my school, British International School of Abu Dhabi's journey with Century Tech over the last 2.25 years now, I think. Thank you to everybody that joined me for that webinar. Looking forward to sending the recorded video out in the next couple of days. I'm also really excited to be discussing alongside some great friends and educators in the region, discussing digital governance and sustaining digital changes in the UAE in private schools, alongside some good friends. Not only the guest education team, but also Philippa Rathmell, Andrew Turner, Hilary Hunt, and Linda Parsons. So really excited to be a part of that discussion and once again, representing my school for the region. But this evening's show, I'm hugely excited about this. I've been watching this school for a little while now, and we've got the principal, Brett, here to talk about leadership, sustainability, and all sorts of things in between. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Brett onto this evening's show. Brett, hello, welcome to the show.
Good evening, Eid Mubarak, and thanks for having me on, Ollie.
Thank you so much for giving up your time. I know that lots of people are probably either travelling or celebrating with friends, but it's great that we can get you on the show, share your story and the story of your school. For anyone that doesn't know you, would you just give us a brief introduction of who you are and what you do?
Certainly, sure. I don't know if everyone can tell by my accent. I've kind of lost the ear to hear myself, but proud Kiwi. Coming from New Zealand in 2012, here to the Middle East. So teacher by trade, obviously. I've got a few pictures that I thought I'd bring up in a moment when we do start chatting about the topic for today about my background, but I grew up in a beautiful part of New Zealand, on the beach, on the coast, in the forest, on the mountains, which I guess was formative in terms of who I am now. Studied in sciences, went on to education, did environmental science, and then went through, the whole journey as a teacher and a coach and a sportsman, and then sort of did a typical New Zealander thing, which is went to the UK and experienced sort of life in London with all the rest of the Kiwis. Travelled a bit, found myself back at home eventually a couple of years later, and still had itchy feet. So that was my journey into the Middle East began. And so here in the UAE, I've worked in Al Ain, then I went over to Saudi, then I've come back here to Dubai. So it's been a bit of a journey. And I found myself here at the Arbor School start of year last year. Commenced into what was going to be a fantastic year and turned into one of the weirdest years on history. So it's been a journey, absolutely been a journey.
Yeah, and every opportunity to learn along the way, right?
Yeah, for sure.
What made you said it had itchy feet there, you'd obviously experienced moving to England and your experience there. What made you choose the UAE is what I'm really
I could give some really shallow answers, but I probably won't give those because people think less of me. But look, when we left, I mean, New Zealand's a fantastic place. I'm a proud patriotic Kiwi, but it's a long way from anywhere. It's quite small, and it wasn't until, for example, I started teaching in the UK that I met many other cultures. I'd never met a Muslim person until I arrived in London. Actually, I remember the first time a couple of girls came running up when we were on a field trip. I think it was to the Science Museum, and they had a compass, and they said, "We need to find this, that, and other thing." And I had no idea what they were talking about. So I realised probably at that point that I was quite sheltered in terms of my worldview, and which is what I love about living internationally. So having access to the rest of Europe and other places from England, I adored it, and being able to get around and see different places and people and things. So when we did go back to New Zealand, we had all intentions of house, children, picket fence kind of thing, and it just didn't work out. New Zealand's fabulous, but we sort of said, what, I really enjoyed being overseas, and so Middle East was calling. It's the shallow reasons, I guess, is there was some financials in terms of the decision to come over here. There was some career aspirations. There was sort of ways of motoring up the career ladder, and it was a neat opportunity. What we came into was a bit different for me from teaching. So, lots of things. But I mean, I love Dubai. I think it's fantastic. I think in the UAE in particular, but Dubai is fantastic.
It really grabs you, doesn't it? And I don't necessarily think that they are shallow reasons. I think a lot of people do have similar reasons initially for moving out here, but actually they fall in love with the place because it does have so much to offer that you don't necessarily always have the opportunity to do at home in your own location, wherever that is. And I think, I'm sure if we surveyed 90% of teachers or even 100% of teachers, you come out here initially, I'll do 2 years and go home, and 3, 4, 6, 7, 8 years later, people are still here. Probably 90% of people are still here, and there's a really good reason for that.
Absolutely. I mean, at the start of the year, whenever you're inducting new staff, there's always sort of what's the one piece of advice you'd give, and for me, it's always it's never where you are, it's who you are. If you're here in Dubai and you want to get into opera singing and you've never been, there will be an opportunity. And if there's not, and you really care about it, then you will find a way. If you really care about playing rugby, you can play rugby. If you want to do triathlon, you could do triathlon. But it's whether you're here or China or Saudi, if it's not where you are, it's who you are. And if those things really matter, then you'll make it work. And so for me, back in 2012, landing in Al Ain, middle of Ramadan, middle of August, unbelievably hot and we arrived with a 2-year-old and a 5-week-old baby, and so the challenges were varied and many, but what a blast. And so we're still here, and like you say, many others I think have touched down with the same sort of intentions of a couple of years, and here they all still are.
I arrived as well with a 4-month-old, so I understand the challenge there. But a 5-week-old, that was bold. And just sort of leadership hat aside, as a parent, what have been the biggest challenges, do you think, for a school community in the last year?
I guess my heart reaches out most to the families that had young ones, but not the sort of really young ones, the sort of year one foundation stage, the ones that really don't do well through a camera. And that as a family has been the biggest challenge, because for families that work, for families that are trying to work and do remote learning, and parent teachers that are trying to work and do remote learning, and it's just, it's been tough. So for me, I guess that age would be tough. And then at the other end of the spectrum, the unknown, you had such solid plans for your children, and lots of families said, this is where we're going, and this is next, and this is where we're headed. And that just went out the window. What do exams mean? How's my child going to do that if they're studying for a year online? Can we still be good and be online? So many questions. So for me, I guess the young ones, the inability to do that virtually, or the difficulties in doing it virtually, and then the unknown, just dealing with the unknown has been the trickiest, hard on the soul, wearing on the soul.
Yeah, and it's, everyone says be patient, but patience only lasts for so long. In reality, doesn't it? When you are trying to manage and juggle all of those different things in your private life and your professional life, it can be a real challenge for lots of people.
Absolutely.
Just sort of delving in then, I won't ask too much on leadership and sustainability, but what made you decide to want to be a principal? It's something I'm always sort of keen to hear about from other leaders.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've kind of always been an educator. Even as a young man, before I went to university, I sort of lent myself to coaching and working with younger children. So I guess that was sort of in me in a way. And then once you get into education, I guess I'm aspirational. I have high expectations of myself. I drive myself, so it was always sort of what's next. So in a way, you start to move up, and then once you get the steam, it becomes a little bit automatic. People tend to lean towards you and say, "What's happening? Where's this guy going? Or what's next?" And then I enjoy it. I really enjoy the game. I enjoy teaching. I really enjoy time with children and helping them sort of develop and progress. But I enjoy the challenge of running a school. And I think one of the most exciting parts is thinking about how you can build a school to enable children's future. Because that's what we're doing. Because by the pathways that we design, we either open or close options. And the sort of pick a path process is really exciting to make sure that we're trying to keep them broad and open and allow children to experiment and explore, but always have the capacity to do something fantastic. And in the Middle East or internationally, it's particularly tricky because, if you're in New Zealand, there's only about 5 universities, so it's a fairly clear pathway. There's not a huge range of choices. If you're in the UK, I know there's a much bigger range, but you tend to have you have a selection in mind, or you might go to the nearer ones, the closer ones. Children that come out of international schools, the world is seriously their oyster. Whether they go to Middle East, whether they go to Europe, whether they go to UK, whether they go to the States, if a child has great qualifications, lots of our children are supremely lucky in terms of their parents can afford a range of options. Not everyone, of course, has that option, but that makes it really tricky to both counsel and design a course that fits for everybody. So, yeah, that's an interesting challenge.
Yes, it is a big responsibility. I also feel it would be remiss of me not to sort of say, I take my hat off to you and all the other principals and heads of schools, because I can only imagine how difficult it's been over the last, not only year, but kind of building up to year and a quarter, year and a half, with ever-changing goalposts. So I take my hat off to all of the principals out there and just sort of in admiration, well done. I can't imagine how what would you like to see change one thing in education to enable those pathways? What thing would you like to see?
Are you controversial? I would like to decouple the admissions test, the entry point for universities, from the exit point of schools. That would be my number one thing I would separate, because I think while our end point is subverted to be their start point, it means that we're always heading to something that might not be linked to our mission and vision. So if we were allowed to, it might even be the same sets of assessments in terms of what exists now, but if we were allowed to design our endpoint assessments, or we were bold enough, I guess, in many ways, to pull away from the status quo and say, this is the product of the Arbor School, take it or leave it. And then another school say, well, you know what, we really like the product of an Arbor School, but just to double check, we're going to do this. And if they did that and it all added together and added up and it made sense to them, then they could accept our child. So that would be my first protocol: decouple the start point from universities from the end point from schools.
I think not too controversial. I'm sure that there's many other people out there that would probably have that. I think that's fair. What bugs me is quite often you don't have that fair playground, I think, and I think that's what students really do deserve.
Sure, yeah.
And something like that, I think, would go away to actually providing that. Something that's always bothered me as well is the kind of stress and mental health of students as they reach that last quarter of school, because it all rides on, a couple of exams. And I don't think that's necessarily right.
Also, I've been around the houses in terms of my reading and my thoughts about learning and whether exams make sense or don't make sense. And some things don't make sense to me. We give them all these tools and all these experiences, and we design ways that are fantastic to collaborate and all these things. And then at the end of that, we say, right, all these fantastic things you've done for 13 years, now get in a room for 3 hours with a pen. It doesn't make sense to me to do that to them. I get it. I get the fair playing field. I get that exams are a really powerful way, if they're designed properly, of gathering an understanding of what children know. You've read things like and listened to podcasts with what's his name, that wrote Trivium 21C, and he talks about the fact that this is still an assessment of grammar, of the knowing. They make sense. Tests make sense, but it just can't be the only way. It can't be the only way, and so there must be another way to do that. So I don't have the answer. I just have the dream.
Yeah. Well, kind of on that dream, then, share us a little bit about your school.
Absolutely. I'll share?
Yes, please. That'd be great. Okay, I'll just add that in now. I'm experiencing a little delay.
Shall I hear? And we'll get going. Yeah. Oh, is that like a strobe effect for you as well?
A little bit of a glitch.
I can stop if you like.
I'll remove it and I'll try adding it in again.
Okay, I'll try sharing again.
Thank you, sir.
There we go. That might be better. Hopefully.
Yeah, that's
there
perfect.
We go. Okay. Apologies if a bead of sweat. I think as head of a sustainability school, so I'm still in my office here in the school, and I think, well, I'm not. I know, I can definitely tell all the AC's gone off. So if I start sweating as we're talking away, it's not because I'm getting excited, because the AC's gone off. Although I may get excited as well. Righty-ho. So in our conversations previous, we talked about the idea of discussing sustainability and leadership, and maybe leadership towards a more sustainable sort of future. So I have put a few slides together just to discuss that, but feel free, of course, to weigh in and interrupt me, because this is not a one-way conversation. So I could have, I guess, gone for a sort of easy win, which would be to pop up, a picture of the environment, a disastrous environment or a beautiful environment, or, kids making mud pies, which all would be, things that would link to the concept of sustainability. But I've tried to sort of address it a little bit today, more in a cerebral fashion, look at what sustainability is, what it means, why, even that word particularly is loaded. And so I'm going to come to why I've used the Russian dolls there eventually. So just in case you're wondering why I've put that in to talk about sustainability. I've chunked it a little just so people know what's coming, and if they need to dip away and grab a cup of tea because they're bored of the current bit, I've sort of said we'll talk a little bit about me. We've done most of that, so I'll be very quickly. A quick chat about the Arbor School, what's particular about us, where we are, who we are, why sustainability, and again, I don't mean sustainability as in the greenwashed version of sustainability in the 3 R's only. It's talking a little bit more in depth about what sustainability actually means, and then the concept of going beyond green. Again, getting beyond the sort of greenwashing concepts, the sort of low-hanging fruit, and really getting deep into why it's important to us. And then, and of course, of interest to our teachers and the pedagogues is practically how do we do that, and then thinking about some questions for the future. So hopefully it won't take us too long to get through that information. That's home for me, and I'm very lucky. Although it is a long way away in New Zealand at the moment, and I can't get there, not with the quarantine, and I'm not willing to do a quarantine for 2 weeks with a 2-year-old. I don't think that would be healthy for either of us, but it is home for me. And so I grew up on the beach, and I grew up on the Golden Sands, and there's 30 kilometers of Golden Sands where I'm from. And, I surfed and I swam and made mischief, and watched the oceans boil with fish as entire schools filled that bay, and chased dolphins and swam with seals and got scared off by killer whales, orcas. So I grew up on that beach and in the ocean, and the photos taken from the top of a small mountain, an extinct volcano actually, and those are all native species that are in the foreground. So that was kind of my playground, and it was formative. And from there, you know, I didn't realize it, I guess, at the time, but it led me to that route of going to university where I studied zoology. My intent initially was to be a marine biologist. At some point I changed to zoology, and then I really found that my passion was ecology, because it got beyond individuals and it talked about systems, talked about connections, it talked about bigger issues, and it involved humans as well, which was really interesting to me. It led me to environmental science, and then out of that I then eventually went into education. So I used to flat live just about down there in those houses, and it was brilliant. One of the best times of my life. I could walk to the surf that way or walk to the harbour the other way in 30 seconds, and you know, I'm very lucky, and I'm conscious that I'm very lucky to have that as an experience growing up. And so eventually, after having gone, we've already had the conversation, you know, from there to Europe, then back to New Zealand, and then back out to the Middle East again, is I was lucky enough to secure the post as the principal of the Arbor School. So the Arbor School is an ecological school based in the national curriculum. So we offer the British curriculum all the way through. Currently, we're up to year 8. We're going into year 9 next year. The intention to open our GCSEs and A-level course in September of 2022. So that's exciting now, is designing what that will look like, making sure we stay true to our mission, but also add value to whatever it is the children want to do. And if you followed any of our socials, you know, I think we have a really, really powerful presence online, and that's, you know, that's not by accident. I think it's a pretty special place. And some people might say, oh, you're the Biodome School, or you're the Green School, both of which we are. But equally, you know, it would be one of my worst nightmares to be the Biodome School, because the biodomes are a fabulous piece of architecture and they're a gorgeous place to be, but they're just a thing. And so they enable us to teach in the way that we want to teach. But I wouldn't want this conversation to revolve around those, because, you know, someone else that's listening might say, well, I haven't got any biodomes, so how do I do that thing? So they are just a funky piece of architecture. We treat them kind of like a journey. So you've got 3 biodomes, 3 of the bigger biodomes. The one in the center, the furthest from the foreground there, right at the back, is tropical biome. 150 odd species of plants, a few animals, some reptiles, some fish. And the idea in that one is a little bit reflective. It's sort of nature untouched, and you might go in there and do some mindfulness exercises. You might go in there and read some books. You might go there and look at big versus small. You might go in there and look at photosynthesis and discuss leaf adaptations. It would all depend on what you as a teacher decide is the importance. And you know, you wouldn't go in there and do, for example, multiplication tables unless you had a better way of doing it in there than in the class. So they're to be used purposefully, not used as a zoo. The second one on the left is that interface between nature and man. So you've got fruiting species and flowering species and touch sensitive species, plants, animals, everything that then says, well, man has, you know, impacted on nature, and this is how we use it. And so then again, how to use it as a teacher? Well, you might use it with foundation stage looking at microbeasts. You might use it as a geography teacher of looking at push-pull features of migration, so factors in migration, and how we could use the sugarcane that's in there as a nice hook provocation for that, and use sugarcane to discuss movement through the Caribbean or intergenerational wealth stemming from slavery, all sorts of different questions you could pull out of that environment. And then on the right hand side is the biodome, which is our eco maker space, which is science lab come design space come crazy inspirational space. So fabulous piece of architecture, but they are just a piece of architecture. The Arbor School, we've got 3 more of the smaller ones, which we use for a range of purposes. And we are in Al Fajan, which is sort of on the southern edge of Dubai, but still only 10 minutes from everywhere. So I'm in the ranches, it takes me 15 minutes to get to work. And I'm not trying to, you know, sell the Arbor School. I'm just saying this is who we are. So in case people wanted to know what I have to bring to the conversation. So as a school, we're lucky enough that our founder is both an educationist and an environmentalist, and so they had this concept, or he had the concept of bringing a school that should be experiential, authentic, inspired by the natural environment, and really focused on the importance of place, because we're in a fabulous place, and yet our children learn lots and lots of things about other countries, lots of culture and history about other countries. Lots of terms that might be Arctic, or they might be tundra, or they might be forest, or lots of the books talk about foxes, and they don't honor the place in which we are. So place-based learning and the importance of place forms a really significant part of what we're trying to achieve. We also said, well, there's a learning community here who connect with the environment and understand that there is an interconnectedness. And so the word we use to describe that interconnectedness and our intent to educate towards that understanding and interconnectedness is eco-literacy, which I'll come to in a bit. There's a fundamental belief that people will act. People are generally good, and they act with empathy and compassion. And if they do that, mindful of the fact that all of these environmental and eco-literate decisions have to be just, then we call that global environmental justice. And the idea is that well, not we call it, that's what the movement is called. And it is the understanding that we should share equally environmental goods and environmental bads. We shouldn't be outsourcing our environmental bads. We shouldn't be externalizing the costs just so we can internalize the profit. We have to share equally in the goods and the bads. People have the resilience, and they need to have the resilience to tackle these challenges, because if we don't do that, we won't end up with a sustainable system. And to deliver on all of those things is we have to have a special kind of style of teaching and approach to teaching, which is why we went for inquiry and project-based learning. And so that in a nutshell describes kind of where the Arbor School is in terms of its journey, in terms of what we have in physical spaces, and how we got to where we are now. So the next question, and again, Ollie, please interrupt, I don't want to rabbit on for too long, is why sustainability? Which on the surface, it seems easy, because it's an easy, sell. Who doesn't care about sustainability? If you said to someone, do you care about sustainability? There's very few people who are going to turn around and say, no, please pollute, go ahead. So sustainability is an easy issue, but I've gone a long way down the rabbit hole in trying to unpick the why, and really got to the point of questioning, not why am I here, but I say that sort of tongue in cheek. I like this sort of quote because it talked a lot about the separation of man from nature, and again, come to that in a second. But I looked at that and I thought, oh my goodness, am I just a soul encased in flesh? It really made me think, goodness, there must be more to life than that. Am I just a conglomeration of particles? Is that all nature is? Am I a bubble of psychology? And when I asked myself these questions, I thought, no, there must be something better than that out there. I must be more to this collection of cells that is me, and the collection of cells that is you must be worth more than just that. So what is it? Where do we go? And I guess that's where this concept of our school tried to sort of pull together these ideas of we're not separate from the rest of the world. We are not this anthropocentric model of humans in the center. It only existed since the sort of Enlightenment period. Before that, people were connected to nature. It was intrinsic. There was no way around it. And so the Arbor School is founded on this ecosophy, an ecological philosophy that switches from being humans apart from nature to humans being a part of nature. And so again, these are a little deep, but the underpinnings of sustainability then come from the idea the world's a sanctuary. We have reverence for life. Frugality is a precondition for happiness, not consumerism. Spirituality and rationality are not opposites. They're not polar opposites. They complement. And we have to heal ourselves to heal the planet. And I don't mean heal ourselves from sickness. I mean change our worldview to understand this concept. We are not separate from nature. We're not the top of the pyramid, because if we do that, I mean, if there's any ladies in the crowd, or men, actually, you should be noticing, by having that concept, as it separates not only men from the rest of nature, but men from women. And this is not, it's not a sustainable way to look at life, and it's not a natural way to look at life. It is a recent way to look at life. So the Arbor School, I guess, is underpinned by an eco-philosophy that says we go from what's on the left to what's on the right. We're an intrinsic part of nature. And if we can accept that concept, then it stands to reason that what happens here in my office impacts on what happens out there. Sorry, I'm pointing to the garden. And what happens in the garden and in the natural environment impacts on what's here, because they're all intrinsically interlinked. And we can't get away from that. We cannot. And again, if any of our readers, if any of your listeners are out there have read Sapiens as a book, or Trivium, 21st Century, there's some really good information there about how we got to this point of separateness, of this duality of nature and over here and man on the separate side. And really, it harkens back to that Enlightenment period when scientific empiricism and Descartes and Newton and Bacon all, were sort of figuring out how we got to this point and how we would understand the world. And they came to the idea that we would understand it as a machine by breaking it into all its smallest parts. And by breaking into its smallest parts, we could then rebuild it with an understanding. But I think what we're coming to understand now with, complexity theory and understanding of systems is that the sum, the whole is more than the sum of its parts. There are emergent properties of a system, of a network, that are more than just understanding the bits. I can't remember where I read it, and I hope someone in the crowd, if there's a crowd, can let me know. But there's a quote, I think it's from Descartes, as they were carrying out live dissections of dogs to figure out how they worked, I guess. And the quote, and I may have read it in Trivium, says something like, ignore the screams of the dying animal because they are merely the creaking of the machine. And again, it just shocks me, but it's an understanding of how at that point we separated ourselves from the world. Just keep flicking through, Olly, because I'm conscious of time. So the Arbor School is underpinned by that. And then that leads us down the road of ecosystems, how we understand what an ecosystem is, why we should worry about ecosystems. Are ecosystems arbitrary? We define the boundaries. So, okay, there's abiotic factors, there's physical factors that might define the difference between a desert and a marine environment. But are they established? Are they real, or are they just a continuum that we sort of draw a line in the sand and say that's the end of this ecosystem? So we're drawing lines in the sand to define the separate points. And so once we get to that point, again, we understand that there's a connection. So the Arbor School says, right, there is no disconnect. We actually have to unpick that learning, is then we start talking about environment, sustainability, and ecology. And that's a really loaded statement, because I think when you go into most schools, if you throw up, say, right, find a picture of the environment, you'll either get this gorgeous picture of a mountain somewhere, or you'll get this disastrous picture of doom and gloom. And, this is what people view. They say, well, you care about sustainability, you care about plastics, you care about the bleaching of the world's oceans, you care about disasters that have occurred. And of course we do. Find me someone who doesn't care about those things, I'd be surprised. But actually, these are, look at them, those are human caused problems. Plastic didn't just automatically appear in the ocean. And if they're human caused problems, they're human solvable problems. And again, I'm just harkening to another book called Factfulness. If anyone's read Factfulness, Mega Misconceptions About Data. There's loads of areas where things are getting better. It's not that problems are going away, but we could look, this is, excuse the quality of the image. Poverty has had a massive drop from 1800 to today. Massive drop. Doesn't mean that people aren't in extreme poverty, but massive reductions. Life expectancy massively increasing. Predicted areas of nature, the cost of solar panels, the number of oil spills, access to leaded gasoline, the depletion of, these are all, again, these are things that we think, if I ask you what's the state of the ozone layer, you'd probably think, oh, it's a disaster. What's happening with the amount of protected nature? Oh, it's all getting burned and cut and chopped. It's not the reality. It's not that there's not disasters happening. It's not that if we don't solve the human caused problems that they won't happen again. But the fact is, we don't have to be, sobbing under the table. These are human caused issues that if we can mobilize and change our worldview, they can be human solved problems. And so that's an optimistic worldview. And so at the Arbor School, again, that's why we chose sustainability, and that's why we have to dig a little deeper, because it's not just about going and clearing the plastics. That's a noble thing to do. You get a sense of well-being, you can see an immediate result, but actually we have to go a bit deeper than that and try and change the norm so that the desire to use it or the ability to produce it becomes less and less attractive. And if we can just shift the norm a little so that it becomes abhorrent to use single-use plastics, or it becomes abhorrent to discard trash, or it becomes as abhorrent as slavery to do some of these things, until it becomes completely out of our consciousness. And that's the move that we need to make. Shall I pause?
That's great. I would go all the way back to kind of the start. One of the first things you said, you talk about your domes, and it really resonated with me, because a quote I often share from Higgins to do with pedagogy and technology is it's not really what you're using, it's how you go about using it. And I loved hearing you talk about how your teachers and leaders really focus on how they go about using the resources that you've got to bring learning to life for the students in a really relevant, rich way that they wouldn't get to experience in many other schools. So I think that's really poignant, and I loved that. Krishna wrote in, thank you, Krishna. She loves the difference between ego and eco. I'm also keen. I teach ESS to year 12 students, and lots of the terminology that you're using, biotic, abiotic, and such, is obviously on the course. And I think it's also really important that students are knowledge rich, and you're feeding that to the students, in a real live context that relates to the world around them. So I'm hugely impressed by all of this. It's awesome stuff.
I would say anyway, a lot of this is aspirational, right? So we're a new school, and so it's a journey, and this is the intent, and we're a long way down the journey in some areas and still just starting in others. So we'll come to the concept of sort of explicit instruction and knowledge eventually. That's what I was going to get onto, but it's an exciting place to be, really exciting.
I think so, but you downplay yourself as you may. If that's not your intent and the aspiration, then you're not going to get there without putting it out there.
Sure.
What really also comes forward as well is it's kind of our moral imperative in many ways, isn't it? To get from that point where, and I'll sort of subquote you here, by changing our worldview, we can mobilize and basically solve the issues that we've created in the past. I think that's a great intent to have for the students. Quite often in education we talk about the leaders of the future, and those sorts of style of things. Well, ask yourself the question: what are we doing in our classrooms on a day-to-day basis to create those future leaders that will solve those problems?
Absolutely, and it's exciting, isn't it? Because you have to be optimistic. Like, you have to be optimistic. I mean, you can't go into nature, and again, we're lucky because we there's a lens here that's really important to us. But you can't go in there and not be enthused. You can't go in there and when I go into those domes and I've got lizards running around and canaries singing and children counting the fish in the fresh air, you can't be enthused by that and not start to care. So how do we get that caring to be the norm? Especially, a lot of the research would show that a lot of the values and dispositions and intent to act don't actually happen in the school. Most of it happens outside, which brings in the idea of community. You can't be sustainable in isolation. This school and these four walls is only a very small chunk. So if we don't mobilize our community at the same time, then we're fighting an uphill battle. So we don't have to just change our children, which is why community is so important. It's not important because they give us feedback or, they'll share the word about Arbor and bring more clients. It's important because we won't achieve our mission, our vision of enough for all forever. We will not achieve it if we don't change more than just the children that walk in the door. We have to change their parents. We have to change the environment. We have to talk and share the message with the likes of yourself, not just to this chamber of echoes.
I want to know as well, so how early on do you, I guess, identify the worldviews of the students in your school? Is that something you kind of do right away?
That's a great question. How do we identify the worldviews? You've just left me a huge assessment task, which now I have to go and identify the worldviews of my children. I'm stumped. I'm stumped because I've never actually asked that question. What is their start point? And it's a really valid start point. We do, sorry, to be fair, we do surveys. We do look at different surveys. We do collect some data and say, what would be your tendency to act in this scenario? Or, in theory, would you write a letter? In theory, would you go and collect rubbish? In theory, would you go and do that? Yes. Have you gone and collected rubbish? Have you written a letter? So that is a questionnaire, now that I'm thinking about it, that we have asked both of our children and our parents. What we did do in the younger years is we have done this sort of reflective videos using the teachers as a guide. And our assessment process in terms of the program evaluation, again, is a piece I was going to come to, but it's a challenge. It's really a challenge because you're not just looking at knowledge, which is kind of the easy bit. Teachers are really, really good at assessing, understanding, and knowledge, but we're talking about dispositions, we're talking about willingness to act, and we're talking about a skill set that are non-cognitive. And so the collation of that data is tricky, and again, it provides so many opportunities to look at modern ways of understanding systems, systemic thinking, values, different modes of assessment, observation, inventories, calling on all the skills of all the different parts of our school to understand how we can understand. For us to be able to evaluate how well, A, we're doing our job, and B, where we're at in terms of delivering on our vision.
Do you think as well in that sort of going on that idea of measurables, and quite often, as you've alluded to already, visions take time to come to fruition. And do you think it would be too easy to either get it too early or too late in terms of, we've achieved our goal? And how can we kind of work around that to make sure that it is that ongoing, sustained improvement that we're looking for? Is that too
No, that's a great question. One again, we're asking. I don't think we're in danger of saying we've achieved our goal already. That's for sure. It always seems to be just out of reach, to be fair. But you like any action plan, you set yourself a big audacious goal at the end, and then you chunk it backwards and say, right, by the end of this year, we're going to have a set of deliverable standards. By the end of next year, we're going to have performance criteria. By the end of the year after, we're going to have collated evidence and put in place some actions to change the community. So there's certainly actionable, steps to this process. But I think one of the things I've learned through understanding networks and systems and ecologies is that this whole thing is about process. It's not about product. Systems and networks are defined by the connections between them and the relationships. It's the worldview is actually changing from that thing of saying there is a concrete deliverable, and this is what it is. It's actually understanding that this is all about systems. It's all about connections. It's all about processes. Doesn't sit so well with inspection. It doesn't sit so well with making sure the school's delivering. But if you try to hold on to that vision, then the inspection becomes a quality stamp. It's not an outcome, but it's not a we're not aiming for the inspection, as I'm sure every leader here is saying the same thing. It's just something that we're going to do to get a quality stamp, knowing that we're heading towards our vision, and we've got the right people in the right places to deliver on that. There'll be a day when we get close to the an inspection or accreditation, we say, you know what, let's just get all our I's dotted and our T's crossed. But it's the two aren't they're not at odds. Delivering on vision and delivering on the short-term goals.
I guess that's the really that's a part of the system in the school, isn't it? All of those things, because each thing feeds each other. You can sort of talk about action plan, communication plan, priorities, but everything has an influence on everything else, and I think that's quite often what's lost. Certainly when people talk about sustainability and it becomes like we were sort of talking off air, a bit of a rubber stamp marketing thing, and right, we've achieved that, and we won't do it again next year. But it should be that constant incremental gain of, okay, well, we did it to 70% of what we wanted last year. That doesn't mean we've got to stop. We've got to. How do we do 30? What's missing?
Well, I think you also need to interrogate, and this is where we are now. Is our aspiration is to be net carbon neutral, all those sorts of things. So you have to start interrogating that sustainability is not something you teach in the classroom, right? That's a fraction of it. The content is a fraction. So we can design teachable standards. Children must know about ecosystems and food webs and food chains. Tick. But actually, are we purchasing uniforms that are fair trade certified, that have got organic cotton, that are, Are we looking at our DEWA bill and looking at ways to reduce massively the amount of energy that we use? Because those biodomes don't come cheap, by the way, in terms of energy. So what's the, how are we reducing that to make it worthwhile? The trade-off is that we get a great teaching environment. Our children will be better for it, but the cost is real. So, looking at all the different elements that make up a school are really, really important. So transport, procurement, purchasing, canteen services, uniforms, staff, construction, all of that comes into it. And so as a school, sustainability isn't, like you say, it's just not something we did today. It's sustainability. To be fair, again, there's a great intention out there from schools, and to say yes to something is always to say no to something else. So if you're going to give up a week for Sustainability Week, you're going to have to get something out of it, because teachers don't have free time. So I do get it that not everyone can just sort of commit all their time to being more sustainable. So it has to be something that is woven in and through and becomes core business. And having started down this route now, Ollie, it's like I cannot see something that is more important to teach than the things that will solve the problems of our world. As long literate, numerate communicators is a given. That's by caring about sustainability, you don't thereby have no time to care about literacy. The two are hand in hand. You can't go and solve problems if you're not a great communicator who's understood the best that's been thought and said and done in the world of English and science and math. Those are fundamentals, but taking a lens then and saying, why are we doing those things? Because we need authentic challenges. We need to really put that in the place of real life problems. We need to understand that knowledge is great for knowledge's sake, but actually it's powerful when it's transferred into application. And so giving opportunities for that is, I as a school leader, I want my cake and eat it too. I want the kids to have fantastic English, maths, science, geography, history, but also I want them to be out discovering and exploring and inquiring and collaborating. And those two things aren't diametrically opposed. It's just trying to get the balance right.
And I think it would be probably fair to say maybe some of those elements can be lost the further up the education system you go, and not through any school's natural fault. I think it would be fair to say.
No, I mean, there's a few more slides in there that maybe I wanted to dive into, but you're right, because a lot of people perhaps that are reading might be thinking discovery's great when they're little. They can go outside and play and make mud pies, and mud pies have just as much value as phonics, and it's fantastic. But then when they get to year 8, well, now they've got to do geography and they have to do maths. And it's right, they do, and most curricula would say we go from the broad and valued to the more specific and specialized, whether that's an IB or the British curriculum or the American curriculum. They all have similar concepts. But then the style of inquiry just becomes more sophisticated. So inquiry learning doesn't always look like a big question which we go and explore. It might be dialogic conversations. It might be Socratic conversations. It might be using a Harkness table. It might be using a STEM methodology. The scientific method is an inquiry method. And so I think we just need to understand what we're talking about when we think about constructivist pedagogies and inquiry pedagogies, because they're driven by questions. They don't have to be open-ended, long-term explorations where children don't have the scaffolding to succeed. That's just poor teaching, and great teaching doesn't leave children with poor chances to succeed. We don't provide of opportunity for failure, because you provide great feedback, you provide great scaffolding, you provide opportunities for modeled practice. Those things are inescapable in great teaching, whether it's inquiry-based teaching or whether it's explicit instruction.
We've sort of delving down into classroom level now, and we've had a question come up from Krishna. Krishna, thanks again for tuning in. What are some things that all teachers could do in their classrooms as a step towards a sustainable classroom?
I like to say design signals intent. Design signals intent. So if you looked around your classroom and said, does my classroom signal that I care about sustainability? So is there natural materials? Do the kids have access to outdoors? Or if there's no access to the doors, do they have access to natural light? Have I reduced the clutter? Have I reduced the use of non-recyclable, reusable materials? Am I bringing inquiry? Is there a zone of provocation that says it's not just about content, it's not just about putting green leaves around the room, it's about how we approach it? Am I inculcating a sense of wonder and awe and questioning? Have I thought really deeply about what my environment is saying to the children? And then once all those things are tied down, I guess it's looking at how they all tie together, and you could choose your literature choices. You could look at the work you do, the provocations or hooks that you use. All of those are great choices. There's actually a piece of research, I think it's called Clever Classrooms, which said, it didn't really drill down to the minutiae of a classroom, but a great classroom with good access to fresh air, good access to natural light, good access to outdoors can make, I think the number's something like an 18% difference in outcomes between a great classroom and a poor classroom. It's a bit difficult, in between, do I put yellow posters or green posters? Don't have such a big impact, but a great classroom and a poorly designed classroom, significant differences on outcomes.
That's I'd love to find that bit of research.
I'll send it over.
just have a read of that. I think that's really important, and I love how you've really clearly articulated there. You know, what signals are the children receiving from being in your room, and how does that transfer to the vision and values of your particular organisation? Because those things can be hand in hand and quite often forgotten. You said that you've got a few more slides to get through, and we've still got 10 minutes to go. So
I'll fast forward. I'm kind of a little bit lost. So I talked a little bit about sustainability and the definitions of sustainability, which we'll flick through that because I'll try and hit onto sort of my challenges, or actually the questions I guess that I've been asking myself. But most definitions of sustainable development are anthropocentric. Immediately, you can see that because this is about development for humans. So when we start teaching about sustainability, I guess, again, we have to interrogate, what are we teaching? Are we teaching about sustainable development, i.e. using resources in a reasonable way so that there's plenty left for others? Or are we talking about sustaining our environment in a regenerative, life-sustaining way so that whether we use that substance or not, it still has a value and therefore it deserves to exist? So unpicking that a little bit has been important, and it's been still a journey for us to really, I had their word nerd to really figure out what the words actually mean. And so the way we approach that is through this concept of eco-literacy. So most traditional sustainability models look like that. Economy overlaps with society, overlaps with environment, and that little wee sweet spot in the middle is where we get a sustainable future. But in reality, those circles aren't equal. They're not equal, because the economy is this sort of assumption at the moment that there's an infinite amount of stuff and it's quantitative growth. It just goes up and up. We can make more and more and more. And if you go more and more and more in the economy, then the environment, the natural capital just has to decrease. There's no way. The overall model maintains the total capital of the sort of stocks of stuff, but only because we're replacing one with the other. And that's just not sustainable. So the model we need to move towards is this. So where everything occurs within the context of the environment. Everything occurs. So the economy then becomes strongly sustainable. It maintains natural stocks. It's about quality, not quantity. It's localized democracy. It's participatory. It's about using our local experts. So this model of ecological sustainability is better than this model. And so I guess this is what we're aiming for. How does it work? We teach the concept of eco-literacy. And so eco-literacy is more than sustainability. It's the way that we can understand models of the environment and ecology and then use it to create natural systems, so human and natural systems that are sustainable. So if you understand the rules of a small scale environment and you apply that to a big scale environment, a large scale environment, do the same rules apply? Limits, constraints, connections, all those things, do they still apply? And so once we understand and have an eco-literate student, then we'll be able to use that knowledge to create these human systems. So eco-literacy, rushing really quickly now, has some key components, and the key components are networks. So understanding that everything is networked. Everything is connected to everything else. If you target something, it will be connected. And so any lines that we draw are arbitrary and designed by us. So as a piece of homework, if you ask yourself to define what is nature, I think we could all come up with a different concept of what is nature, and it would still be arguable. So networks mean that we are connected. Because we're connected, everything, back to the picture from the start, is a nested system. So all systems exist within other systems. They're all nested. And so because they're both whole but part, they influence both up and down. So every system will impact on the next system. Understanding that and dealing with that complexity is tricky, but it's important. There are cycles everywhere. Everything cycles. Natural cycles, human cycles, man-made cycles, they cycle. And so because we're a member of these cycles, it's important that we understand those cycles. There is a flow of energy from top to bottom, from sun through to everything else, and then those flows drive development and change. And so this one really inspired me. If there's any geographers out there looking at the lush plateau in China, completely denuded, completely eroded, thousands of years of cultivation, and it looked like the picture on the left. If we take away the man-made impact, allow it, a little bit of scaping and a little bit of regenerative farming, and it looks like that now. So everything develops, everything changes over time. So the question really becomes now is how do we teach this stuff? And the important part is making sure that these children have prolonged experiences in natural settings. They have to get outdoors. They have to be in environments so that they can appreciate it. Whether you have a biodome or not, the key is to get outside. And if you can construct a small scale space to get outside, the children will love it. If you can get a big scale space, the children will love it. But that is critical in order to help them make sustainable decisions in the future. We have to transform those environmental perspectives from understanding or feeling that the environment is a commodity to turning them from consumers to conservers. And so we have this transformative learning approach, which we're trying to apply at the Arbor School. It's about the head, the hands, and the heart. And if we can establish that, then we get a change in worldview, and then we get this change in norm. Practically, it's meant we've had to understand how to deliver this. So we've had to come up with some standards, big, borrowed, steel created. We then link that to the national curriculum. So if this is our standards for eco-literacy, where can we big borrow the best of geography? Where can we take the best of science? What can we do from language and literacy that would then apply? We identify the best pedagogies that we prefer and the strategies to teach those things, and then we create assessments, which is an ongoing challenge. So we've really looked at a progression of topics and themes over time, and underneath that and underpinning that is our principles and concepts. So for example, it's not just about green stuff. In EYFS, we teach about community and sense of place, eminently achievable. In year 1 to 5, then we look at diversity, cycles, self-efficacy, this understanding we can make a difference, responsibility, eminently teachable. Lots of people looking at it go, that's easy, we can do that. Interdependence, change in systems, and then we get into these more theoretical concepts of long-term effects, limits, and equity. So these are then underpinned by a set of standards, a set of statements, a set of performance criteria that says, if we deliver that, this is what it would look like. A really tricky part and the really hard and the slow part is understanding what sorts of inquiry models we're going to use to deliver on that, because like you said, it gets difficult when we get older. So what we've worked on is defining the different kinds of inquiry, sort of putting those in a nutshell, and then saying this is the kind of areas where you might prefer to use that one. And there's a much longer list than this. So the idea now is that if you are a teacher of ESS, so you know what, I'm going to look at the design thinking model of minimally guided inquiry. I'm going to go away, I'm going to do a little bit of research. I'm going to try it in my year 7 class, and I'd like my partner to come along and watch me so we can unpick whether I did a good job of that or not. So you can understand that that's the slow sort of change over time that we're really trying to address. And then we've looked at our own learning ecologies. So how we blend this direct instruction with inquiry pedagogies, why direct instruction is still really important to us. And I think there might be people out there going, oh, this is, if it's all inquiry, it doesn't have the same impact. It's not all inquiry, but there is a preference to make sure you get the balance right. How we can integrate those strategies over a number of courses over time. And then what the big questions look like. So that's kind of been the process. What it might look like, and I guess where I was headed to at the end really is the big challenges for me as a leader have been interrogating myself as a systems leader and saying, is what I'm doing just what I hold dear from what I've known before, or am I really trying to change the system of what we do here? And knowing that systems exist and saying that they're important, am I then replicating that in my leadership team? Am I replicating that in how we lead the school? Am I replicating that in terms of how we bring outsiders in? So those have been the big challenges for me. And so then I've been educating myself as a leader in the tools of a systems thinker, the changes I have to make. And it's been a challenge. So I sort of started off with this similar sort of org chart that most people have, hierarchical. But by default, when I looked at, well, I've designed silos in. I've designed them in by default. So I said, okay, well, let's have another go. And so I looked at the actual network of my school and tried to build that. And I said, well, that's interesting, but it's of no use to me. I can't do anything with it. So then I've tried again. And so I think I'm coming to something that is more useful to me now as a system and allows me to measure the connectivity between the different nodes to say, right, well, if my achievement team is connecting with my community team, how will I know? And if my sustainability team is connecting with my wellbeing team, how do I know? And that has been for our school the journey. So I'll stop there. I've got plenty more, but I'll stop there. We're out of time.
Yeah, that's pretty much bang on an hour. I love how your model has evolved over time. I think that's really interesting. Initially you started with what's a byproduct of probably our experience in education, which is that hierarchical model, and that's what the vast majority of people are familiar with, certainly on in their career. But I like how you got to your current model, which is a lot easier to read than version 2.
Oh yeah. I went into the pit of despair when I designed it and wondered what to do with it. But I've sort of come out the other side saying, okay, they're all just a model, and models are all flawed. So this is what I've got now.
But this makes sense. I can't quite read the statement.
Yeah,
as in an environmental system, there's flows in there, and actually lots of this makes visually it looks like it makes sense, and that is obviously transparent across your school, and people will know who to go and where to go, and where those firm or dotted lines are across all of the different constituents within the organisation, and I think that's really important.
As I say, that's the aspiration, that's the plan. And so, I mean, most schools would recognize that as a sort of distributed leadership model. So you're going to have action teams that operate. But I guess the question for me is, am I satisfied that they're operating as a network? Is each one of those nodes communicating with others, or is it just a silo operating over there, separate from a silo over there? And if that's the truth, then I need to put in place some actions to change that.
What would be your kind of singular biggest piece of advice for any leader out there that's looking to move from the kind of hierarchical to the distributed, that you can then identify the distributed is working?
I haven't nailed that understanding of whether it's working or not yet. That's my model now. So I guess the question would be, when you establish your distributed leadership model or networked or communities of practice, is understand your success, your standards for success at the end of it, in terms of if you want to understand if it's working as a network, because each team will have an action plan, so that'll be quite easy to quantify. But is this operating as a system? Go into it with that scientific head on and saying, I need to know the impact of what I've changed, because education is littered with good intent, and changing from this, which we know, and love and trust, to this requires work. So is it going to be worth it? You'd want to know before you started. So I haven't actually moved to this yet, and part of it is that, am I going to do this? Is it worth the effort? What's going to be the outcome? Or do I stick with what we know until we really embed it?
And that's quite a cultural shift, I think, for any school. In terms then of kind of adjusting the culture and going right back to the start, when you talked about duality and then that culture of kind of how, what quite often the biggest challenges that you might face in making that cultural shift?
I guess it's been a journey of education for me, and as I say, I've read to try and take a complex idea and make it simple, and the only way I've managed to get to that more simplistic understanding for me, because it's not simple, is just to learn more. So the challenge is to get beyond the classroom and try to unpick the why, because teachers are great at the what. They really are superb, and they can come in and they can, given a clear set of standards, they can crack on and make a fantastic lesson and unpick what the children need to do. But really getting into the why am I saying go and do that in the biodome? Why am I saying it's possible to take geography down there? There's a why behind it, not just because I want them to be in the biodome. I mean, I'm picking on geography, I don't mean to do that, but I guess taking time to understand the why is one of the biggest challenges. So now, for example, our induction this year is going to be much more why focused, and then when they come on site, it'll be much more how focused. So a bit of remote before they get on site.
I think that's really important as well, because that will, you shared earlier on the Venn diagram of economy, social, environmental, and finding that sweet spot in the middle, quite often being a kind of flawed model, but actually having economy at the center all the way through to being the wraparound of environment. This one, your sustainability model. If people understand your why, and then that's pervasive across the organization, it's more likely that the how will become the natural based upon the why. I haven't explained that well because it's quite late, but I know what I mean. I think you know what I'm getting at.
I get you. Yeah, the why. Well, the why is mission, right? Not why is vision. And I think it's really important. So we're not a green school. We are a green school, but we're a mission-driven school, purpose-driven school. And I like to think that's our USP, not the biodomes. Not that other schools aren't doing that same thing, but there's not many our mission and vision doesn't say we will go to the biodimes. It says we will. Sustainability is enough for all forever. That's what we're trying to achieve. We achieve that by creating literate, numerate communicators who have been exposed to all the best the world has to offer, and they do it in authentic, place-based context. With all the other bits and pieces tacked on. So it's an exciting journey, but it is a, if every decision becomes kind of deliberate. Example, we have a Christmas tree, at Christmas time for those who celebrate, and it's a wooden sort of replica. But you can't just hang tinsel on it. You can't just hang baubles on it. You've got to think, oh goodness gracious, what can I put on there that's sustainable, or harkens to our mission. And so even those small decisions, what goes on the Christmas tree, take energy. And so especially in a startup, we're only 3 years old, we haven't embedded what goes on the Christmas tree yet. It's a new decision each year. So those take energy.
That's hugely important, I think, to sort of acknowledge that no matter how small a decision, it does take energy. Christian says, thank you, definitely needed going forwards. Wishing Arbor the best. Is there anything coming up that people outside of Arbor could get involved in?
Oh yeah,
I told you about that, but is there anything just as a sort of final before we?
Absolutely. I mean, I've always said that we can't be sustainable on our own. So we do have lots of community initiatives. So we some of it's limited by COVID, but we still have community yoga. If you want to do yoga, come down and practice with our team. We quite often have community events. Like we've had community art classes free. You don't have to be a parent, just come and join us. We've had community composting. Those things will come up again. So please keep an eye. And if it's not us, contribute to the mission anyway. Follow someone online, ASRAC, or there's loads of different sustainability groups that will do cleanups or that will get you outside. Actually, number one thing, get the kids outside. Take them outside to a park, to the beach, to the mountains, to the forest, to the mangroves. Get them outside. And get them outside as much as you can, as often as you can, and you've taken the first step. If you could do that, it'd make my job easier.
And build from there. Yeah,
absolutely.
That's that. Listen, Brett, thank you so much for giving up your time. It's been an awesome window into, I guess, your philosophy and Arbor's philosophy. Every small step counts, I think, and it seems like you're making lots of really positive small steps in the right direction that add up to the larger, bigger picture. If anyone wants to get in touch with Brett, you can find him online at Arbor Principal, and you can find Arbor School at Arbor Dubai on socials. Brett, what's the school website?
www.thearborschool.ae. So THE, the Arbor School.
Thank you. So 3 different ways there that you can get in touch and get involved. And I'm sure that they'll be posting online on the various social channels about all the community events that are coming up. Thank you so much, Brett. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Appreciate it.
Again soon.
Thank you.